How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm good.
Usually I'm the one doing the interviews, so it's kind of nice to be interviewed as opposed to doing the interviews.
Yeah, it's I'm good. I'm good. I just got back to town. Just moved here in August.
Nice.
Yep. I'm loving it though. Miami's it's incredible. I've been coming here a long time. My grandmother lived here when I was growing up, so had a lot of appreciation for the city. My father's from the Dominican Republic, so we have a lot of Latino roots, and it's been a special place to me my entire childhood. So it's actually great to actually like plant my real roots here, bring my family here, my kids, and we're very excited about what's next.
My dad would say, there's probably somewhere in the world where I'd rather be, but I can't think of it.
So good stuff, man. So you've been a pretty big supporter of Web3, and kind of establishing Miami in a way that like the only comparable I can think of is the way kind of like Silicon Valley with the early tech boom in
Sure.
the late 90s, 2000s. Like what made you lean in so much? Like why? Like
Yeah.
I heard that little bit about Roblox, and I kind of share that sentiment, but
Yeah.
curious kind of a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it actually precedes that moment significantly. There was a person, an individual, who was a real estate developer here in Miami, who decided that they wanted to build the first network access point years ago. And his name was Manny Medina. He now runs his own family office and also Emerge, which is our large tech conference here in Miami. And everyone thought he was crazy to do this large data center. What's a data center? You know what I mean? I remember taking the former mayor to the data center and telling him that we should put our information on the cloud, and he started looking up in the air. And people just didn't know what this was, this concept of cloud and data centers and network access points where, a ton of data was flowing through these critical centers, nerve centers, if you will, of the internet, which people don't realize is a set of decentralized computers, not too different from what Bitcoin is, frankly. And so, it became very evident at that point that technology was going to dominate the next iteration of human existence. And if you're building a city or an ecosystem, you have to acknowledge that. And in a hyper-competitive landscape, as I referred to it in my opening remarks, you have two options in a world like we are in today. You either compete or, as Jeremy said, you sort of wither away. And we saw this starkly during the Industrial Revolution with Detroit, which couldn't really compete with some of the other car manufacturers. And we saw what it did to a city that was the most prominent city in America at the time. So the whole emphasis is driven a little bit by fear, frankly, to not want to go backwards, to not want to wither away, and a little bit by excitement of the opportunity of what I call this double inflection, right? This quad generational inflection and this generational inflection combined, which is when you see these disruptive moments, when you have orders of magnitude differentials on certain macro factors. When they come together and the city exploits them, I mean, you see we're number one in the nation in wage growth. We have 1.4% unemployment. We're ranked the happiest city in America, the healthiest city in America. We grew 12%, which is the second most growth in our history last year, in addition to the 2.5 trillion and the 400% growth in our venture capital pipeline. The KPIs are just off the charts in terms of what we've been able to accomplish by being strategic, by having a plan and a vision, and by executing. That's it.
It's, I draw a lot of parallel from what you just said to kind of my own journey, right? For those of you that don't, know my background, I come from the traditional media world. I was the president of a company called Billboard, a music company, started as a magazine company back in the 1800s, actually. And I came to Doodles, this was officially in May, but I had started helping them out in, earlier in the year when the boom of NFTs was kind of at its peak. And everybody was really interested in the space, but maybe not no one, a lot of people that came from my world were very hesitant to really dive in. Fear of, not doing the right thing, fear of looking silly in front of their peers, fear of making a really bad career mistake. And I really had this kind of epiphany that this really is the future. Like, once you spend the time to do your research and learn about what the blockchain is and the underlying application, people think of it as just crypto and now NFTs, and it's so much more than that. It's going to revolutionize the way we live our everyday lives in a similar way that the internet did. And right now, when people think of NFTs, it's a word that they don't understand fully. Like, I actually kind of like to use the analogy of MP4s. When you watch a video on the internet, you don't call it an MP4, you just call it a video. But at one point, it was pretty highly technical stuff that wasn't really made mainstream until iTunes started streaming your favorite television shows or movies. So anyway, I bring that up because I took the dive full time into Web3, and it was scrutinized by a lot of people. The people closest to me most, actually. And
I know the feeling.
Yeah, and it's a leap of faith sometimes when you do these things. Like, you live this really stable career, you have this great growth trajectory. Like, we were doing better than we had ever had, and there were obviously ways that we could keep the status quo and keep the business moving, but ultimately it became I was either going to help drag a traditional media company into the future or actually go and help create the future. So I feel like that journey for me was really special, and I learned a lot about myself. I can't even imagine kind of the leap of faith as a public leader to kind of make that same thing when it comes to policy and people.
Yeah, I think as a public official, you're not really rewarded for taking risk, right? So I remember, I gave you sort of the explanation of historically how we got to this moment. And then there was a fairly recent, we're about on the 2-year anniversary of the quote unquote tweet heard around the world, right? Which was the recent catalyst for this latest sort of exponential growth moment for our city. And it was on December 4th of 2020. And it was a Friday, I believe. And I was home and sort of came home exhausted on a Friday, as you normally are. And you kind of get in bed, and everybody knows those Fridays where you just kind of lay down in bed and you just don't even have the energy to change. You're so tired. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at my Twitter feed, and I see a tweet come through that says, "What if we move Silicon Valley to Miami?" Pretty simple question. And attitudinally, at that moment, and I didn't realize this, the sort of macro sentiment at the moment was anti-tech, sort of anti-innovation. If you're successful in a city, we don't want you. And I just responded very innocently, how can I help? Because this is what I have been trying to do for 10, 12 years, right? Build this ecosystem, and doing it basically bootstrapped. So we went from a bootstrapped ecosystem build to a direct IPO. It was pretty much overnight and like catching lightning in a bottle, and seeing, of course, a lot of work had to be done to sort of foster this, right? I tweeted from that one tweet that got 3 million impressions. I tweeted 800 more times in the month of December by myself, which got 30 million impressions, all for free. We put out a billboard right outside of Google in San Francisco that said, "Thinking of moving to Miami? DM me." It's like a fictitious tweet. Guess what? A lot of people DM me. So I realized I can't do this by myself. And so we created Venture Miami, and some of the Venture Miami team is here, as a back office to try to help these companies and these people who wanted to move to Miami to create this ecosystem. And you have to understand, Miami is very different than a lot of cities because 70% of the people that live here were not born here. In that sense, it's similar to Silicon Valley, where 95% of the people that live in Silicon Valley were not born in Silicon Valley, right? So there's already this welcoming of outsiders that a lot of cities hesitate to welcome, right? And then I think the second part of our ethos is that we are traumatized by our origin story for many of us, which is being expelled from our country of birth, that had leaders that tried to sell people on the idea that if you just give us all your business and you just give us all of your wealth and all of your property, don't worry, we'll make you equal. We'll make everybody equal. And they did. They made everybody equally miserable and equally poor, right? So, yes. So I think the combination of those two factors were jet fuel, if you will, for the notion of scale. And as we started to bring more and more venture capital and private equity to Miami, you started to see the scale starting to take hold and this excitement. And then I think we had something that I term the FlyMo effect, which is a term that I made up, which is flywheel plus FOMO combined. FlyMo, right? So the flywheel effect plus the fear of missing out combined, I call it FlyMo. And that just created this inertia for change and for growth. And that's why we became number one in the nation in tech job growth. We are number one in the nation in tech job migration. I mean, who would have thought? Yeah. It's always good when you have your dad whistling in the audience for you. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that Miami, of all places, a place that people consider to be a place for flight capital or a place to retire or a place, where you would have fun, right? As a serious place to do business, that would be number one in the nation in tech job growth. I mean, if you would have told me that on December 3rd, I would have said, you're crazy, you need to get some professional help. And that's what happened.
Like we're here right now being able to draft off of that statement because Doodles had the opportunity to really be anywhere that we wanted in the world. We had the opportunity to stay fully remote if we had wanted to. And we're setting up shop in Miami. We're opening an office in Design District in a few months. And the mayor and his team have been incredibly supportive in actually onboarding us into the city. And it's not, you don't feel that kind of support. I've operated businesses in New York. I've operated businesses in Los Angeles. You don't really feel that grassroots support, in my experience, really anywhere else. So one, thank you for that.
That's the best advertisement for us and for our venture team. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really been a great experience for us. And you pay attention. This city's on fire right now. Like recruiting people, getting people to move from places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, you would think that it's going to be really difficult to do just because people have families, people have established lives, but people don't want to miss out on what's happening down here, right? Like even if it's not, even if you're not in it for the gold rush of whatever the financial gain could be by getting into an emerging, technology business or industry, like just the lifestyle you can get down here, like it's special. So,
it's a great value proposition.
Very great. So we're here, Doodles is, for those of you that don't know too much about Doodles, Doodles is a Web3 entertainment company. We started as an NFT project, quickly became one of the top projects in the entire space. We've done over $550 million in total sales volume in our first year of operations. Thank you.
I want to tap that one up.
And another Miami resident, is on our board and one of our partners in the business, Pharrell Williams, who came down here a few years ago.
That's great.
And our goal is to really be the bridge between Web 2 and Web 3. We're not out there trying to reinvent the way people stream music. We're not trying to reinvent the way people watch television shows. But what we are trying to reinvent is the experience that fans and collectors and consumers have with a brand from the minute they decide to start engaging with that brand. So all of the experiences that the blockchain can actually connect to live events. We have a big live event actually happening in 2 days called Doodle Putt. It's a brand new immersive experience. It's gonna be a lot of fun. And the whole idea for us is ultimately to onboard people into Web3 by creating really good content, really great experiences. And you can't do that and create experiential without the support of a city and actually like connecting with the people and the community in that city. So it's been a great experience for us. There's a lot more coming. Doodles is, you're gonna start to see Doodles in a lot of the traditional mediums that you see some of your favorite intellectual property, streaming television. There's gonna be some music coming early next year. And you're gonna, a lot like the companies that do this best, I think are gonna be the companies that can onboard new people into Web3 without even really knowing that's what they're doing, right? Like, you don't use the internet today thinking, oh, I'm, using this crazy technology that, you really need to be a technical leader to know how it works. It just works. And that's what the blockchain's ultimately going to do for the collecting experience. I think there was a house, there was a mortgage actually done with a smart contract in Virginia. Like, I think that's going to be something that we see the blockchain do eventually.
No doubt.
Yeah. So, we've been very hard at work. What, if you, how the city's role and how some of these businesses play out,
Sure.
what do you, hope to see in the next few years? Like what do you want the narrative around Miami to be when it comes to kind of like supporting growth and innovation and supporting businesses and leaders?
Global dominance. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm not kidding. I do think that there is an opportunity for us to become what I call the capital of capital, right? I think we're living in a increasingly decentralized world, despite some of the centralization issues that we've had in the last couple of months. And I think that companies will be created in a particular place, but the jobs that they create will be ubiquitous, will be all over the place, right? Will be everywhere in this country, everywhere around the world. And so places like Miami will be dominant in terms of capital aggregation and capital allocation decisions. And I think over the next 10 years, we could become theoretically or potentially the most dominant global city in that category. And that category is important because that's the decision-making category that creates companies, empowers them, and scales them. Having said that, that will create prosperity and wealth probably for the entire country, if not the entire world. It's not going to just benefit one city. That's the way I think the world will play out over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Our job as policymakers and as elected officials is two or threefold, right? I think one is oftentimes government gets in the way, right? So we want to not get in the way, right? We want to facilitate, want to be facilitators. I think the second thing is, you have all elected officials have you could call it a soft power or a soft influential power that in some ways can be more impactful than their direct ability to effectuate a particular decision. And that's the ability to inspire, that's the ability to vision, that's the ability to convene people and create things. In my opinion, what separates the good from the great in terms of what we do, is that your ability to take your job and accentuate it. And then I think the third thing is, particularly in the context of what we're seeing today, is there is a regulatory role. There's a regulatory role that we have to play to prevent, to the extent that we can, bad actors from hurting people, right? And I think that's something that when you see the consequence of when government doesn't involve itself, when it says, oh, this is too complicated, or we don't really understand this, or we're just going to sort of let this play out and we'll enforce as things happen, sort of in a reactive way. I think being proactive, having engaged, had we engaged and had we been proactive, we could have created a framework with guideposts that could have avoided a lot of this stuff. So I think it's a failure on the part of our governments to be proactive as opposed to reactive.
I sincerely appreciate that, just obviously operating a business in the space that we do, because sometimes when you're dealing with nascent technology that has so much room to grow, policy can either hinder that growth or it can really support it. But
no doubt.
You want the best thing to do, like me obviously having a biased opinion, is helping foster innovation, drive innovation while still making sure you're taking care of people. And that's it's something that we think about every single day. There's not a ton of very clear rules yet. So what we're trying to do as a business is make sure that anything that we do is construed exactly the way we intended it to. And once these rules, start to, once this policy starts to unfold, we then react to that. And it's the proactive approach is so appreciated and so spot on, because sometimes you worry as business leaders that these things are just going to happen to you.
Of course. I mean, it's hard to operate in an ambiguous world of ambiguous rules or no rules. And I think, in this whatever you want to call it, thawed winter, whatever, those companies that survive and emerge should really have a leadership seat at the table to talk to regulators and legislators, teach them, because there's a lot of teaching that needs to happen, and then also guide them in part on how to build the sort of guideposts that A, prevent bad things from happening, but B, give them the comfort to know that they can operate without worry. They could sleep at night without worrying that someone's going to come knocking on their door tomorrow to enforce some ambiguous law that was really meant for archaic financial instruments against some of these new, technological products that are out there.
No, and that's awesome. And there's been some bad press and obviously things that have happened in the in the Web3 industry in recent weeks, and unfortunately a lot of the naysayers of the space have kind of gotten like a little win under their belt because hey, we told you this was all kind of propped up and not real. And the people that are really sticking around, the people that are building, I think what you're going to see coming out of this time is that there are true partnerships being formed. Like, this is no different than any nascent technology that's emerging in the very early days. There are people that are going to try and exploit that for bad, and people that are going to get in over their head and do things they really shouldn't be doing. And all of that stuff is actually a necessary part of the evolution of new technology. Unfortunately, people get hurt along the way, but this tech that we're actually trying to pioneer use cases for is going to have a much more positive impact long term than any of the heartache that some people have felt, unfortunately, in these recent times. So I think coming out of this time, I think we're going to see a boom that hasn't really been anything like. Everybody in the world is aware of Web3 at this point and the new use case. Initially, it was just crypto. Now, NFTs are a really big part of that. During the next, bull cycle, there's going to be another application of the technology, and then it's going to continue to expand from there. People often ask us, like, who are your competitors, right? Like, is this company your competitor? Is this company your competitor? People like to put things in a box. So, yeah, we compete with everybody in our space. But it's like saying we're Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and all these companies competing with each other in the 90s. Like, what they all do is so different from one another, and this technology, the way that it's used, is going to be extremely diverse. So in the future, we're going to start to see this tech used in very different ways, and it's because of these foundational partnerships with government, businesses, like public sector, private sector, like that's ultimately what's going to make this space thrive. And there's no one leading like the city of Miami. Like it really is, it's comforting to be here. And we hope that the rest of the states in this country, the rest of the countries in the world will kind of follow suit and really, support growth and, and help develop this.
Well, look, I thank you for that, and I thank you for being an example of a company that's successfully been onboarded into our ecosystem that could have been anywhere and decided to choose Miami. That's the story that I like to tell over and over and over again. That's why I've done almost 300 podcasts, which I call Cafecito Tech Talks, where I tell the story because the story becomes a narrative, the narrative becomes a reality, and then things change. So I think that's incredibly important. And I'll just say, I think in this space, as we emerge from this, we have to have, let me see how I say this, deeper conversations about the technology. I think what you've seen is a lot of people that are technologists who are deep into the technological aspect, maybe don't understand very well the business aspects, or certainly not why regulation exists and why it's been needed, right? It's something that has been created mostly over the course of human existence as a result, like I said, reactively, as a result of certain things, right? Of certain realities that have occurred, and understanding too that systems like a fiat system are backed by all of us, and there are strengths and there are weaknesses to that kind of system, just like there's strengths and weaknesses to a non-fiat system, particularly when there's a run on the system, like we see. And in the case of 08, 09, we saw the government step up and sort of prevent that run from being catastrophic, right? And in this particular case, that doesn't happen because you don't have a fiat back. So I mean, these are profound, deep conversations that have to be had, and understand how you harness this technology in a way that is going to channel growth, like you said, without creating any negative or as minimal negative repercussions. Because at the end of the day, I always tell people, you can legislate against bad behavior, but if somebody's going to do something wrong, guess what? It's impossible, almost impossible, for government to stop them, right? Like, everyone knows that there are stop signs. We've legislated bad behavior. Do not run stop signs. I know nobody in here has ever run a stop sign. No one. So we legislate the behavior. We don't always get people that follow the rules.
Well, I think that brought us to time, but thank you for the time today.
Thank you
for having me. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see everyone soon.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. Welcome to Miami. Yeah, of course.